So I'm very excited to introduce our final keynote speaker, Tim Byrd, who's the Senior Vice President of Information Security at Wells Fargo. Tim's been a great supporter of a lot of the initiatives we've had here at HackSecure. And when I was talking to Tim, I thought one of the interesting topics that we haven't talked a lot about within the HackSecure community is sort of the idea around collaborative defense and information sharing. So Tim's been a big participant in ISAC, and I thought it would be awesome for him to share his experience around that, what that means, and just dive into the idea of how the big financials are sharing information to help in the defense of their institutions. So without further ado, Tim Byrd.
Thank you, Court. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. So I will try to keep this brief because I know I'm the last one, so it's between me and those drinks and the bar being set up in the back there. So I'll try to keep it brief. But Court, thank you for having me here. I always enjoy coming to Boston. There's such a tight, close niche of individuals here in the Boston area that I've been able to meet through Court just in the last 6 months. So always enjoy coming here, and it is definitely a pleasure to be here today. So today I thought what I'd like to do is just share the journey around information sharing and what I've seen from a large financial perspective. I've worked at 2 large financial institutions over the last, I'd say, almost 15 years now, and have maybe a different perspective than others, but definitely want to talk today about the journey of how I've seen information being shared, where we were over a decade ago to where we are today. So I'm going to start off by talking about in the past, really the past decade to 15 years ago, where things were, how they've improved, and what really was the game changer. And there was a game changer that I saw occur over the last decade. And then I'll spend some time talking about where we are currently and some of the challenges that we still face. So for those of you that are in the startup community that are here in the audience, maybe those are challenges you can help solve. But there's definitely some areas that we need to improve on. We've made significant strides, but we still need to make more. And then I'm going to give a perspective on really the next 5 years, where I think things are going from an information sharing standpoint, and I'll share those thoughts with you as well. So, past decade. So when I think about just the past decade plus, maybe even 15 years, what's really changed? I mean, when you look at just in technology in general, people are more connected, right? Much more connected today than they were 15 years ago. I remember when a lot of the financials were coming together and sharing information about maybe it's threat indicators, maybe it was about vulnerability information. We would come together maybe once a year, we'd talk about it, and a lot of that information would be kind of held close to the vest. And then if you look at kind of the progression of that, so back in 2000 timeframe, that's when all these new ISACs were being created. And these were information sharing and analysis centers. So you'll hear me refer to those as ISACs. And these ISACs were basically the central gathering of threat information to critical infrastructure. It was a way for two-way sharing between public sector and the private sector. And these ISACs were not just limited to financial services. These ISACs were created around automotive. There was one created around oil and gas. There's one for healthcare, information technology, and obviously in the financial services. And so as Cord mentioned in the introduction, the area that I've been closest to has been FS-ISAC, which is Financial Services Information and Analysis Center. So FS-ISAC was founded around 1999, and it was in response to the Presidential Directive 63. Later, that was updated in 2003 by the Homeland Security Presidential Directive number 7. But people were slowly coming together. And like I said, information was really held close to the vest. I'd try to get information on certain maybe best practices, and it required a level of trust, right? Very similar to how you all probably are in this room. You trust more individuals maybe than others, right? And so maybe there's more information you're willing to share to one another than maybe others. And so what was the game changer from what I saw was come 2012. So in 2012, what do you all remember what happened in 2012? Anyone? No. Very, very large distributed denial of service attacks, DDoS attacks. And they were targeting financials. They were targeting the top 10 financial banks. And very quickly, it was no longer, it was a necessity. We had to start very quickly sharing information. Every day, the attacks would start, they would end by 5 o'clock. And if another bank had been attacked, you want to know exactly what those indicators look like, what were the IP addresses, et cetera. So very quickly, people started to gather. They swarm in, and we started to gather, and we started to share a lot more information than I would say that we shared prior to that event. And that's really, I think, what stemmed, even when I think about where we are today. If it weren't for those DDoS attacks, I don't think we'd be as mature from a sector standpoint with information sharing if it weren't for that big game changer event. So today, where we are today is information sharing is still manual, right? There are some technologies that we have to share, threat indicators, that sort of thing. But one of the very first strides that started in 2012 and around that time was a security working group at ISAC and said, today we are sharing threat intel information. We are sharing indicators via email. And those emails are adding up into people's inboxes, et cetera. But wouldn't it be nice if we could just have a solution of some type of technology to help share? Each bank could input it into their system versus taking an email and trying to translate that and then having to get your SOCs and everybody else teams to respond and see if you've seen anything that's concerning. And so in the financial sector, that security working group later on turned into a solution called Sultra. Sultra, just within the last year, has been purchased by a third-party vendor. So it started, I'd say, and there's still some ways that we need to look at improving there. But around that same time, even when Sultra was created, what we learned is if we want to have a technology, which is great, we're going to need to be able to speak the same language, right? So I'm going to need to be able to speak English so you understand me when I share information. So in the move from human to human type sharing to machine, you're going to need to make sure that we all standardize on the same attributes. Same attributes. Maybe it's an IP address field. We don't want to date in that IP address field because that won't work, right? And so in 2012 is when DHS really kicked off the initiative around sticks and taxi. I'm sure many of you are familiar with sticks and taxi. Back then, I was actually having a lot of conversations with vendors around sticks and taxi and asking and pushing the vendors community to start adopting sticks and taxi in preparation for machine-to-machine type of communication, because it's not just sharing the threat intel amongst the financial community. It's also, once we have that information being shared, how can I start to upload that into my controls and do that in a way where I don't have to manually copy and paste and make updates into my control sets? How do I start to take all that information and start to replicate it into my control landscape and start updating in real time? So the other thing that I'd say that from where we are today that's been very helpful is in 2015 there was a Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, and it sounds boring, right? Information Security Sharing Act. But what that helped though is it helped alleviate some of the issues we were having around liability protection to companies, where and what that means is that we wanted to be protected if we shared this type of information. If something were to go wrong, we want to make sure we have the right protection. And so that's when the whole Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act took place, was in 2015, that really helped us be able to provide more data than we were previously. So when I look at where we're going, right? So I'd mentioned that we've made some great strides. We've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. A lot of that is around automation, right? We need more automation. We need more curated, trusted information, and we need to take it beyond indicators. So today, I think the market's really focused and spending a lot of time on how we take threat intel and indicators and share that amongst one another. But what if we were to take the analytics that each institution's putting on top of those indicators and the analysis on it and share that, maybe to help save some time, and share that amongst all the other financial sector. The other thing that I think that's in need is, as we go to automation, as we move to machine communication with intel sharing, it's going to be even more important that the data has the right integrity around it. One of my biggest fears is once we have that machine-to-machine type communication, that it's very easy just to upload bad indicators on purpose, potentially, that could then really maybe shift the controls looking at somewhere else when they're coming in the back door. So making sure, in the future, how are we looking at ensuring that we have integrity around the data that we see getting uploaded into this automated machine? The other gap that I'd say that it's still present today, each ISAC does really well with sharing amongst those ISACs, right? So financial sector, we've got it all built out with FS ISAC, sharing amongst that sector. You've got healthcare doing theirs. You've got oil and gas sharing information as well. Some may be more mature than others. But you're not seeing a lot of cross ISAC sharing. And the only place that I'm really seeing that is within DHS. DHS at their watch floor, NKIC, on their NKIC watch floor, they have multiple sectors represented. But I think where we need to really go is, how can we take some of the things that maybe the automotive industry is seeing? And maybe they're seeing something right now with the whole WannaCry ransomware. And I'm so surprised that people are in the room with all this WannaCry ransomware that's happening right now, which is just tremendous. I mean, it's impacting just a number of institutions. I think the last I read was 237,000 computers have been affected across 99 countries, and it's continued to expand. China was hit hard, but there's number of variants that are also being created. So my point with that is, how do we start to get that information, those indicators, and start bringing that into the financial services ISAC? If none of the financial service companies today have been impacted, but maybe the healthcare has, how do we start to share the information cross ISAC? So that's a big area that I think we need to improve on. The other thing is, some of these sectors are more mature than others, and I think it's kind of our civic duty to start finding ways that we help some of the other sectors. How do we go and help maybe a sector that may not be as mature as maybe it's the financial services? And I think a lot of it comes to starting that bridge, finding ways where we share amongst one another, and then building the relationships within those communities. I think that will be that'll be really helpful. But as I mentioned, I mean, this is our civic duty. I mean, what I keep, and I tell my teams all this all the time, but we need to really be the ambassador for cybersecurity, because everyone plays a role here. And I think that's where we really need to shift into our minds and the thinking that, be the ambassador of cybersecurity. So I talked about ISACs. I talked about how there's multiple forms of ISACs, from the financial sector to healthcare, et cetera. But there's other places to share information, right? ISACs are not the only place you can share. There's sharing, obviously, in this room with this conference today. But another good example that I tend to do, when I tend to think of even the ISACs, I tend to think of ISACs as threat intel, threat indicator sharing. But when I want to have strategic conversations about best practices for, maybe it's architectural designs, maybe it's a conversation around cloud, maybe it's a conversation around looking at some of the new NIST guidelines, I tend to go to BITS. BITS is part of Financial Services Roundtable, FSR. BITS is made up of the top 100 financial institutions. I sit on I have a role at BITS as well, so I actively participate in those meetings. But that's where I tend to I bring people together, and we talk about solving other problems, right? A good example of that is back in 2012, when those distributed denial of service attacks were taking place, and the financial institutions were having havoc over trying to defend against DDoS attacks. I hosted many sessions of best practice sessions with all the top 100 banks, right? Bringing the top 100 banks in, saying this is what we're seeing. Here's our recommendation from an architecture standpoint on how you need to be defending against these attacks. This is what we've not done well, and this is what we have done well. And being completely honest on areas that we need to improve on. So another example where I've just recently leveraged bits is NIST came out with a guideline to look at deprecating SMS as a one-time passcode. So we brought members of every financial institution in together. We talked about the pros and cons and whether or not we get that it may not be the best solution, but what are the alternatives? It's better than username and password. And those types of conversations tend to take place, in my opinion, in some of the other forums, and that's where we brought it into bits. So, two things I'll mention in closing. One, I do think we need to be concerned about some of the smaller institutions and how information is getting to them, not just the financials, but even healthcare. Just recently, I had an example happen where I was at the dentist office, and I knew my dentist. My dentist lived actually in the same neighborhood as I did many years ago, and he was sharing with me that he was subject to a ransomware attack. It completely locked him out of his systems for 2 days, and the only way he was able to survive it was he had some database that he had that was not impacted by the ransomware that he was able to load back into his systems, but it shut him down for 2 days. And I think when I'm seeing even the WannaCry ransomware that's happening right now, what's concerning to me is smaller institutions as well as some of in the healthcare sector, like my local dentist, right? How are they thinking about this? I mean, even in having a conversation with the dentist himself, you quickly understand that they need help, right? I mean, his answer was, well, I'm getting a new firewall. Well, there's a lot more controls than just a firewall, right? And so I tried to help him by educating him on training his receptionist. Don't click on the links. All those different things we all know, we take for granted. I try to help by sharing that information with that dentist. So those are the main things I wanted to cover. I wanted to talk about the past, where we are today, and where I see this going in the future. I'm welcome to take questions.
Can you speak to any use cases at Wells Fargo where information sharing has either saved your butt or you guys have saved another institution's butt?
Absolutely. I mean, I won't specifically talk about what it was, but I would say it was more trusted relationships, because even though we have ISACs, even though we have all these groups that we share, a lot of it is vetted individuals and friends, and almost like phone a friend network, where I had someone call me. They had someone call me and say, hey, this is what they're seeing, and it really helped us, really, really helped us. And so how do we take that and to the masses? That's the difficult part. How do we make it, and take it in a way where we start to share that information with more than just myself, but others? But yes, I have. And that's probably happened a couple times.
Is there anything specifically going on around the existing WannaCry ransomware attack that you guys are collaborating on?
For WannaCry, I would say there's bulletins being put together. So ISAC's actually doing a really good job right now putting together bulletins around what they're seeing, what the impacts they're seeing, and then some of the recommendations. I'll give you an example. We'll find out that Microsoft is going to be releasing patches to XP, which that was surprising to me for WannaCry. XP has been not supported for however long, but they've created patches for WannaCry. That information gets shared very quickly at ISAC, right, to all the members, letting them know, because some may have end of life type of technology. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm not as close to a lot of the leadership there. I don't hold a board seat at ISAC, but I will ask the question. I know a lot of the folks at least. And I can ask them, how can technology companies, how can they get involved? Because I know the membership levels have grown rapidly, but that's more financial services and expanding international, more so than technology companies joining. Or even maybe there's alternatives. Maybe there's ways that you could still get information but not be an active member, that sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah, especially as all those shadow IT and everything moves outside. Really good points. No, so I think let's talk afterwards, and I'm happy to broker that conversation. Yes. What was the question? Like. Yeah. I don't know if they're looking at OASIS or not. I know they're heavily looking at AIS, but I don't know necessarily if they're looking at OASIS.
What are you seeing in the growth of cybersecurity insurance? Is it something that is becoming more active?
Much more active. I'm seeing a lot more companies, and especially even in the financial sector, sign up for cyber type of insurance in general. I've also started to hear some rumblings around if it's a nation state actor, whether or not they'll still provide coverage, and those are like in the last month I've seen some conversations around that.
Well, it's like every insurance policy, you have to be careful what you buy.
That's right.
But institutions going, oh, I'll just buy insurance, I don't need to care, I don't need to worry about.
I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing it more as a just in case we'll have it because maybe it's regulated, et cetera. But I'm not seeing any parties say I'm just going to buy the insurance and not have controls at all. It could be happening in other sectors. Not in the financial sector that I've seen.
So what is the barrier for the ISACs to share information? Is it truly just a trust issue? Because it seems to me it's the banks and the financial services and their competitors.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't non-competitors want to share?
I think it's finding the right places to bring the groups together and congregate, right? There are different. So today I'd say public-private partnerships, like public-private in general, two-way communication. That's there. My understanding there is growth coming, but I still think it's going to be another couple of years out before we see true improvement there. But I don't think it's just trust. I think we've got to bring the people together. They've got to congregate in the same area, right? But I think there's still a ways to go. Okay.
Thank you very much, Tim. And thank you.